Okay, welcome to Switch Your Stitch with your host, Katie Turner. Super excited today. I have Caroline with me who specializes in, after many years of but in corporate global finance and leadership, recognizing the next level to get to both career-wise and mentally is often hampered by this thing called imposter syndrome. So I know it's affected me and my ability to move forward, and something that I have worked with over the last 20 years of being an entrepreneur. So this is something you specialize in, and I'm excited to talk about this because I know every business leader at some point has dealt with it, as well as entrepreneurs. So I'm going to hand it straight over to you to give us a brief background of also why you're here in Australia, because I know that you do work in London as well, but also how you ended up coaching Brain Powered.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for having me. It's really wonderful being here. I actually ended up back in Australia because I left banking in 2019. It was 18 years I was in banking.
Wow.
So yeah,
longer than my 2-year stint. That's what
yeah, and it was something which I fell into. I think it wasn't. All of my friends really would describe me as that they're not. You're not one of those geeky finance types. And so I think all the way through my career, people were kind of saying, "This is interesting. Why are you in this kind of role?" I think I was very lucky that I was able to work with some really smart people, and I worked in London and Australia and Singapore and then back in London, and I was able to have some amazing experiences, and I think bring a lot of my own personal values and things to the roles that I did. So although I didn't necessarily kind of fit traditionally in that kind of world, I guess I kind of tried to make the most of it. And if I look for a kind of theme which ran through my investment banking career, it was always about people. And so in about 2015, I decided I was going to train in coaching. So I became a professional coach. I did my kind of day-to-day job and then did that on the side, and then brought some of that coaching into the bank that I was working in as well. And so it was one of those things I think was always in parallel to what I was doing. With that kind of focus on people, whether it was I was kind of leading teams or I had a chief of staff role, that was always the core. It's like, how can I get the best out of people? And really that's what coaching is. You're about empowering people and finding their best selves. My particular focus is on neuroscience for coaching. So that's the kind of brain-powered coaching bit.
Tiny bit from finance to people to science, right?
Yeah, and the thing is, because it's so important, because if you understand how your brain works, you understand your behavior, and then you can start to depersonalize it from I'm an emotional person, or I'm just having these reactions to things. Once you understand, oh, that's actually an evolutionary response that I have, it completely changes in terms of your level of power over your responses. And so that's a big part for me, is helping people understand that background, and therefore they can shift their behavior along with lots of other things.
That's kind of in the NLP range as well, or is it completely different?
It's different to NLP. I'm not trained in NLP. It's it's a lot of it is just about science. It is about how does your brain work. What kind of survival responses do you have? If you have that kind of response, how are you going to behave? And understanding when you have that kind of behavior, how does what are the physical outcomes of that too? And so, if you have a rabbit in headlights situation in a meeting, why do you have that? What's going on in your caveman brain, and therefore how you can control it and how you can have the best possible outcome that you can.
So you're giving them the tools as well. Ken, I did a podcast last week with a lawyer, a serious criminal lawyer, actually. And we did discuss this about how much of it stems from our childhood. Do you think your reactions, how far you can go, or is it that you've been hampered with encouragement from a child, or is there any correlation there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a kind of medically trained person, but I think certainly from a lot of the research that there's attachment theory, which is talking about how secure you feel when you are young. That definitely has a fundamental impact in terms of our brains and how they develop. Because if your brain feels safe, it won't adapt in a different way in terms of then its behavior. If it feels scared, when you're young, then the way that your brain will be shaped will then shape your behavior when you're older. And so I think it's pretty well established that attachment theory is a fundamental part in terms of how we'll react in later life. But certainly there's a genetics piece to it too. There is a wonderful researcher at Harvard Sonia Limbrowski, and she talks about the genetic set point of happiness. About 50% of our happiness is determined by our genetics. 10% is circumstance. So if you are a child in a Brazilian slum versus a child in the Western world, that will make a small difference, but you would have thought it would make much more difference than that.
Yeah, definitely. Circumstantial as opposed to anything else.
Exactly, but only 10%. And I think that's quite indicative in terms of that whole, when someone wins the lottery, how do they feel? They get very excited for a period of time, and then they probably spend all the money, and actually they actually go back to a set point. But then 40% is you can shape your mindset. So I think that's that's what I work with really in that kind of coaching world. And what we're trying to do is help people understand you can shift how you think. And I think that's so exciting because you're not signed up for life. Absolutely can influence it, and it's not determined by your circumstance entirely either.
I love that, because I have that theory as well that, childhood, I have a lot of empathy for children. It's a passion of ensuring that, emotional blueprints are the best that they can be, because that sets them up for life. But by the time we're an adult, we also have choices. And I think that's where this stems from, that, you have a 40% mind shift availability, or even 50% if you've come from a great background, that's without even taking genetics into it. So I think that's amazing. And the work that you can do to allow for that shift to happen, is that glass is half full versus, it's half empty.
Yeah, totally.
And do you think that's a leadership quality? Like I've seen a lot of posts recently, mostly on LinkedIn, about empathy being the number one quality for leaders. Now, I think that's the number one quality for humankind, not necessarily leadership, right?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I think a lot of leadership is driven by trust. And really, when you look at high functioning organizations, it's where you can really see that there's a basis of safety and trust. And this is the kind of concept around psychological safety. So do you feel safe to be yourself at work? So how do you feel safe? You feel safe when you can connect with people. And how do you connect with people when you're both vulnerable? So there's the wonderful book by Brené Brown, Daring Greatly, and she talks a lot about the power of vulnerability and the courage in vulnerability versus that being a weakness. So I think what the kind of world that we've been in the last few years with COVID, I think this is where there's that shift in terms of, for leaders who aren't who just been functional, right? They've just been, all about performance. They're not going to be able to get the same out of their staff. And I think that's even more heightened in a lockdown, or, even just people working from home more. You need to be so much more empathetic, to be listening to people, what they are saying and what they're not saying. Because if they're at home and they haven't heard from you for 2 days, they're going to be thinking, oh my goodness, I haven't heard from my boss. They're probably thinking, and all that, you're just busy. Whereas if you'd been in the office, they would have seen you and you would have kind of given them a wave and, just a thumbs up. And so we're not getting all those social cues that we have done in the past. So empathy from a leadership perspective, I think, is absolutely critical.
And obviously consistency in these times as well, because like you say, you know, if you're used to your boss sending you an email every morning to say, you know, good morning and here's our task for today and ginning you up, and then it's 2 or 3 days without having that, you obviously coming into your self-worth drops as well.
Yeah. And the way our brains are wired is that we notice negativity more than positivity. Again, an adaptive response, because that has helped us survive. So 60 to 70% of the thoughts that we have are more wired towards the negative. And it means that the kind of messaging that we get, we will notice that more, which is clever in terms of we notice things that threaten us. But what it also means is that we have to be very deliberate in terms of what we allow in and what messages we give to staff or people around us as well.
I did see a great post on that today as well, talking about it. It was Einstein, and I don't know if it's real or somebody's made it up, where he's done his times tables on a board. 1 times 9 is 9, 2 times 9 is 18, all the way down to when he's written 9 times 10 is 91. Now, and nobody had congratulated him on getting the other questions right. But as soon as he got one wrong, they all started to laugh. So it is that tall poppy syndrome. It is that negativity that we seem to focus on rather than the positive outcomes.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So, Caroline, you've worked in London, Singapore, Australia, probably a lot of other places. Is there any huge cultural differences in leadership styles amongst the different countries?
I think in the leadership styles, I think probably in Australia and the UK, it's probably similar. I think part of that is driven by where have those people worked. I think when I've come across people who've just worked in Australia, they tend to be a little bit more focused, as you would expect, on this kind of part of the world, and maybe don't have as much of that breadth of thinking and experience. In Asia, it is quite different because culturally there is a different kind of perception of hierarchy, and so they're probably more used to people just looking up to them for the very fact that they're a leader. Whereas I think in more of the Western cultures, there's more of you need to earn that and earn that respect a bit more.
Once you're given that status in Asian cultures, it carries with you.
Exactly.
And people expect that because of the name or the label.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So let's come down to imposter syndrome. Can you explain to our listeners what it is?
Yeah, of course. So there are probably 3 things about imposter syndrome which I think are really useful for people to take away. And the first thing is that it's different to self-doubt, because self-doubt is about what you can do and the skills that you can have. But with imposter syndrome, it's actually at an identity level. So it goes quite a lot deeper. It's about who you think you are. And the really important thing is that it's the where you have the skills, but you tell yourself the story that you can't do it. So you have this kind of thought pattern, which is, I'm a fraud, I'll get found out, I'm not meant to be here. So that's the first thing. It is different when you pull it apart from that self-doubt piece. The second feature of imposter syndrome is it's where you discount your achievements. So you attribute them to luck or just coincidence, and that's rather than actually your abilities or your intelligence. And I don't know about you, you mentioned that it's something that you suffered from. I would do it in terms of, I'd look up to a role that someone had in the organization. I think, God, they're very senior, they're very accomplished having that role. I would then be given the role that's, a couple of years later, and I'd think, oh, they probably just gave it to me because they couldn't find anyone else. Yeah. And I think that's a real attribute of it. What was your...
More so with accreditation, university, getting the ability for me to even start my own business and starting it. This is the first business I've ever started under my own name. under my media company. And I really was like, why would you do that? Like, who do you think you are to name a company under your own name? Like, people are going to think that you're up yourself and all of that. And what have you got to bring? Like, it really played with me for a long time before I just went, you know what, I'm doing this. I can do it. I've got the contacts, I've got the networks, I've got the education, I've got the experience. Just trust the process. And it was it screwed with my head a lot, even for the name.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is the nail on the head in terms of the third point, which is it's context dependent. So people may not have experienced it, but it will come up when they change role or they step out of their comfort zone. And that's when all of a sudden you think, oh my goodness, they're going to find me out, but I'm not meant to be here. So you may not experience it kind of in a situation where you lead a team, but if you are then asked to be on a board and you look around and think, oh my goodness, who am I to be here? And the outcome of it can be really damaging. So like you said, it can kind of freeze you up, and that's kind of your stress response. So you can have that anxiety, can lead to greater stress and fear of failure. Perfectionism, that was my one. I just can just get to the point I wouldn't do anything without it being absolutely 100% perfect, which is very time consuming. And also people pleasing and procrastination as well. So you just don't even start because you've just got that, you're locked up. And the problem is that over time, you end up with that low-level chronic stress. So you're activating your sympathetic nervous system all the time. It's like having your foot on the accelerator. And over time, that just is exhausting and can lead to burnout. So it is something which is really important that people deal with rather than that they just ignore.
It's funny you say that because I deal with corporate clients, even in my fitness business. That's where my niche really lies, because I've been in there. I wanted it to be an addition to their life rather than their only focus, which I know people who have been trainers or worked in sport for very long periods of time, that becomes their focus. Oh, their client has to eat this, drink that, train every day. And my background comes from, no, we just need you to fit it into your life. But a lot of my corporate clients that come to me very rarely lose weight in the interim or even in the early stages. And part of that is because of the cortisol response that they're dealing with day in, day out. And that's a fat inhibitor from a physiological and science point of view. So your body is in stress. It holds on to body fat, especially around the center, because it's placing excess stress on your major organs, and that body fat's there to protect it. So
yeah,
the physiological response to that as well is huge.
Oh, absolutely. It's so damaging in so many ways. Killing brain cells, which stops you thinking, just problem solving. And this is one of the things I think organizations miss, is that actually when they create an environment based on fear, which, some of, not all, but, it's quite a few of those kind of finance institutions can operate on that, and more so with the regulatory kind of environment, which has kind of swept in after the global finance crisis. But the outcome of that is that people are operating in fear all the time. So they have that low-level chronic stress, and their brains aren't functioning in the way that they could do. So you're not actually getting the best out of your brain. There was some Harvard research which found that your brain is 31% more productive at positive than negative, neutral, or stressed. So just creating an environment as a leader where people turn up and they feel like they're valued, like they can be themselves. It doesn't have to be fun and positive. Doesn't have to be something which is means that you're not performing. You can have a high performance organization while still having that kind of environment, and actually that's when you'll perform at a high level.
So really, the number one quality for any leader is ensuring that their staff or their team feels safe. Right. And what you're coming down to is that they can be themselves. Because I did a podcast with ex-CEO to Bridge Climb here in Australia, who he Todd Coates. He was CEO for 18 years. And when the tender went to another organization, within 3 months, he had to move 1,100 people out of Bridge Climb.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was a highly stressful situation as well, as any other sort of thing. But we talked about being safe, and for me, working for myself for 20 years, I feel safe in terms of my income. And he said he always thought it was the other way around, like working for yourself, it was always very unsafe having a job. But we're seeing now more than ever, especially in COVID, that anybody can be let go, and organizations are making that decision.
Yeah, and this is where communication is so important, and that's the vulnerability piece. Stepping up as a leader and saying, "We don't know what's happening right now. I'm finding this hard too. I know you're finding it difficult. I will give you as much information as I can at the point when I can. Right now, some of it is uncertain." And actually having the confidence to say that, rather than just not saying anything, because coming back to that negativity filter that we have, if we don't hear anything, we will assume the worst. And because, again, you're not getting the social cues as well. Organizations have to be so deliberate around trying to give that reinforcement. If you're only going to make, of course, some people will need to make some people redundant, and there are going to be some organizations, sadly, that won't survive, but a lot will. And so making the vast majority of the people who will be fine, making sure that they understand that is really important.
Okay, so from a leadership point of view, I mean, you've said that 40% is in our brains that we can shift, 50% is genetic, 10% is circumstantial, depending on where you're brought up and your accessibility to things like fresh running water. And what are some things that people can do? Like for me, exercise has been a staple in my life for 30 years, and I do it every morning at, I'm up at 4:30 to ensure that my mental health is taken care of, and my productivity and my perception is, I know, 1,000 times better.
Yeah.
Other things can you recommend that we can do to get us out of that hole or negative effect?
Yeah, so I think for me, a lot of it is about prevention. And the way I think about it is, imagine you have a spring in your brain, in your mind, and over time, things like stress, high pressure environments, maybe home education, the lockdown pressure, all of these things, they wind that spring up very tight. And that's when you have that situation where someone pulls out in front of you in a car park and you completely lose your mind.
I was seeing a bit of that.
Right. And I was in a situation a few years ago when I had 7 different functions that I was managing, and therefore 7 different stakeholders. And I went into work one day and I went to kind of look at my enormous list of things to do, and my vision actually just went really blurry. And I had just been pushing. And what I realized was I hadn't given myself any kind of wiggle room, and that mind spring was just about to snap. So for me, it's about prevention, and how you unwind the spring is things like exercise. Sleep is so important. The book Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker, that's a wonderful, slightly terrifying book, but it really does help us understand how important sleep is.
Oh, yeah.
You're much more likely to hear things as being negative if you have had 5 hours sleep versus 8 hours of sleep. Yeah. The amount that you hear completely changes. Cancer, stress, all of those kind of things. It's terrible without sleep. Breathing. I think a lot of us have forgotten to breathe. One of the things I often do with clients is just take 3 deep breaths in through your nose and out your mouth. And Wim Hof, obviously, I think has brought a lot of this kind of breathing exercises and cold water immersion, that kind of stuff, to the forefront. But even just 3 deep breaths every morning.
I always thought, along with meditation, I'm not got the time for it. I can't do it. And then I listened to this podcast with David Goggins. He's an ex-Navy SEAL, strongest, toughest mind and body man in the world. And one of the things that he does is just lying down and visualizing a 4-sided square and breathing in 4 sides and exhaling the 4 sides. And I thought, that's something that I can do. I'm a very visual person. So for me, just for a minute of that, where my mind can't go anywhere but focusing on the breath and the 4 sides of the square, is really empowering.
Yeah, really nice. That's a great way of doing it. Because I think it can have a real weight to it. It's like meditation. It feels like I need to be a monk, on a mountain somewhere. And it's just not true. You literally can just see it as breathing. And I read something the other day, which I thought was a really nice description of it. Meditation is as if you have a glass of murky water. And what meditation does is it allows all that dirt to sit to the bottom.
Right.
So it clarifies, it allows that clarity of thought. It's not wasting time. Meditation will help your cognitive processing anyway. So it will help you be more efficient. If you're someone who goes, I don't have time, it will make you better anyway. So even if it's only 2 minutes, start with that. And you can always build up to it.
Yeah, I love that. And the power of sleep, like even from a physiological point of view, I'm asleep by 8:30, 9 o'clock at night to get up at that, but it's a quality 7 hours. And, that cell rejuvenation at a DNA level is so important. So the cognitive functioning the science behind that must be huge. So
yeah, totally. The other thing which I do, and I do a lot on the course I run and with clients, is gratitude as well. And again, that it can sound a bit kind of airy-fairy, but lots of research shows that gratitude and shaping your mind to be grateful for what you have and actually focusing on different things. And it doesn't have to be the big things in life. It can be as well, this beautiful cup of coffee that I've got in front of me this morning. But it can lower the pain felt by people with chronic pain. It helps cognitive processing, and it thwarts something called hedonic adaptation, which is basically where we get used to the good things that happen to us. So over time, we may initially love a new house that we've moved into, but after a while we just go, yeah, it's just a house. Whereas what gratitude does is you actually really start, you process it and you go, no, you know what, I'm really enjoying my dining room. I love the view. And actually that stops us just getting used to things and having this kind of dopamine driven society that we're in, where we just want more and more. And we never end up satisfied.
Oh, it's never been seen before. And I'm a culprit of it as well. I know when I was at university, I was like, I'm going to measure success by being able to buy a bottle of wine over cask wine, or, that was like the goal, to be able to buy a cup of coffee every day, and not just, scramble for the cents. And then you get to the bottle of wine, and then it's like, well, now I'm going to have the Penfolds, or now I'm going to have the Verve. It's like you just keep moving up. And rather than having that appreciation of, I'm so lucky to be able to have that glass of wine or appreciate the cup of coffee, sometimes 2 that I can buy a day, is huge.
Yeah, absolutely.
Social media screws that as well, right? We see people, you're scrolling through social media. A lot of it, I can't believe how much is staged, fake. It's I bought a new car recently and I actually cried driving it home because it was like a massive goal. And it was the first, I think, self-appreciation that I've got here. Like, this was a huge achievement.
Yeah. Well, and this is the thing. I think if you're, when you're a top performer and you're someone who has loads of ambition, like clearly you do, it's so easy to go, okay, done next, move the bar. But having a roll around in that stuff is so important.
Does that come into play? Like, do you do any DISC personality or Myers-Briggs or anything of that? Does that also have a disposition as to how you can change your mindset?
I focus more at the base level. I think lots of people in different organizations have various different kind of personality tests and things. So a lot of the people that I deal with, they already have their Myers-Briggs, their letters, or whatever it is. So I think part of that is just talking about it and kind of going, all right, so what are the ways that you interact with people? What kind of personality type do you have? Therefore, how can you be a better leader? And I think sometimes just reflecting on people, that their way isn't the highway, that kind of thing. So, but the neuroscience is something which is completely consistent to everyone. There are differences between men and women's brains. I think the survival piece is absolutely core. Men and women function in slightly different ways, as we know.
Tell us a bit about that. Can you touch on that? Like, is it survival, female, male, the hunter-gatherer?
Yeah, so there is definitely an element of male brains are kind of wired a little bit more to compete. So when you look at younger boys, they are much more driven to them. They don't have kind of so many of the games which are, let's pass to each other. They're much more kind of, you have kids saying, yeah, exactly. They are definitely functioning more towards that kind of angle. Whereas female brains, and from a younger age, there is much more about collaboration. So I think some of the theories around that are, from if you were, our early species, the kind of caveman days, you from a female perspective, for you to be safe, you are going to be much more likely to be able to make sure your offspring continue and are successful. If you have your female group around you, you're much less likely to be successful in fighting. So the kind of response that a female brain would have, we don't go straight to fight. We go to cognitive processing and hang on a minute, how can I make this something which is more of a kind of win-win? So we have more of that process, whereas male brains have a more direct relationship, a direct pathway to that kind of competition side.
I always say as political leaders, when men get into arguments, they blow shit up, and women just won't talk to each other for a while.
Yeah, well, it's very interesting. I think I saw a number of times that where I would have, my bosses saying, can you sneak around and find out this about this team? And I'll be like, I'll just go and talk to them. and I think I worked a lot with trading and sales in my kind of role, and where you could have very combative relationships when you were kind of in the tech and operations area with that, because a lot of the time what we were trying to do was shift behavior. And actually, I think that's where sometimes a bit more of that kind of female energy was helpful, because I wasn't trying to compete. I wasn't coming from a place of arrogance or needing to have a win. For me, it was like, what was the best outcome that we're trying to get to, and how can I make sure my team are able to operate in the best of their abilities. Part of that comes from, hey, it would be nice if you said thank you once in a while to the traders or salespeople, and they were like, okay. But when I wasn't coming from a position of that winning, if we'd done something wrong, I'd just say, look, we did that wrong, apologies, but what we're going to do is X. And then it evaporates so much of the anxiety and aggression. It's like, let's just move forward. Let's understand what went wrong and how we can move forward.
Yeah. And then the next module was gratitude, was it?
Yeah.
Sales, apologies, and then how to say thank you. So now you work for yourself entirely?
Entirely, yes. I'm my own boss. Me, myself, and I. Yeah. Yeah.
So were you scared? And what was the biggest hurdle when you first did that? Like, did you ensure that you had a safety net? Because I always say, you should, for me, especially in COVID, my husband owns his own business as well. So we had to ensure that we had a financial safety net there because both of our businesses have been affected. So to make that leap, and what was the biggest thing that scared you?
Yes, so I absolutely had a safety net. That for me was a really important part of the privilege in working in investment banking, in terms of being able to save some money over time, and certainly that gave me the confidence to do something else. So yeah, there was a point I got to a point I was like, I know I'm meant to do something else. Like I kind of tapped out in terms of the types of roles that I would want to do. And so I guess what made me feel safer was, okay, I'm just going to take some time out, see what I want to do. I didn't know I wanted to do the coaching. I had the intuition on it, but I thought I'd just give myself some space, but just give myself the space to think about it, with a little bit of that backing. And then I was able to kind of have a think about what is the next step in the right possible way. So from the fear point of view, having the finances behind me was helpful. And I knew that I could always go back. I guess I went through lots of scenarios in terms of, okay, well, I could be a consultant. How could I go back without having a full-time role if I needed to? It's like, I could work at McDonald's, no, probably not. Like, yeah. what are the things that, would be, and ultimately when you've worked in that industry, and I was lucky in that I was leadership roles and things, which, they're very transferable skills. So even now, there are some days I think, oh, I might just have to go back and do some of it. That's okay. I think that's part of the freedom, and it gives you the confidence to be able to say, you know what, I'm just going to give it a try and put my foot on the path, and hopefully, I really believe if it's something that you're passionate about, that is aligned with your values, aligned with your purpose and all the skills that have got you to where you are now, you will make it work. Yeah. And hopefully then it will be a success.
That's one of my things. I always say, what if it doesn't work out? It all turns, you can always go back. Yeah. And that's, I was doing leadership training, contracted for a long period of time, and it was always sort of a safety net. Oh, I know that I can pay the school fees or the mortgage or whatever it was. And then finally gave that away this year as well, and embarked on mine. And I thought, if it doesn't work out, what's the worst thing? I can go back to doing the leadership training. And
yeah, absolutely. And that's some of the fear, and that kind of working with people. And okay, so what's the fear? What's the real deep-seated fear? What it comes down to, maybe that's, that I'll be a failure. And there's a lot of what comes up is judgment. And it's anticipated judgment of that other people would have. And often that's just not true in itself. So, when you actually ask people, they say, oh no, it'd be great if you did X, Y, and Z. We'd love to see that. And we really admire the fact that you've taken that step. Even though you think, I used to be this corporate person and now I'm not. So,
well, I think it becomes an attachment to a label as well. Like even when I sign off emails, like it's co-founder, CEO, director, like it's just me. Yeah, Katie. And that's, especially when I talk to people who do come from a corporate background, it is about labeling positions for job roles and superiority and that corporate ladder. Yeah. So what about the social aspect? Because I've worked for myself for 20 odd years, and a lot of my friends unfortunately know that I'm on my phone 24/7 when they get a lunch break or whatever. I'm the first person that they call because I think, oh, Katie's at home all day doing whatever. But what about the social aspect, that coming from a corporate environment to working for yourself? Is that a transition as well?
Definitely. I think that's probably one of the hardest things, and probably where I needed to be really deliberate in terms of now I have on my kind of list of things I do every Monday morning is who am I going to meet up with? It was a few months ago I suddenly had a big wobble, and I was like, oh, everything in my life has changed. I'm in Australia. I'm not working in a job anymore. I'm working with myself. I haven't got people around me. I haven't got my friends. I haven't got my family. And it was just one of those moments. And what I realized was, it comes back to that, what are your anchors? What are the things that, bring you joy, that make you feel safe, that make you grounded? and making sure that I was socializing, because I can really dive in, and I can get stuck into PowerPoints and Excel for days on end.
Background, yes.
Yeah, and as you said, like when you're running your own business, you are everything. You are all of the people. So how do you make sure that you have a network around you? And I guess I lived in Australia for 8 years, but so I do have people here and some wonderful friends. But having said that, from a business point of view, it's I'm just learning more and more how incredibly important it is having like-minded people around you. Yes. Just to be able to share the experience of, this is hard.
I did a post this morning. I was creating content. Well, I can just do my hair and makeup 1 or 2 days a week and live in tracksuit pants for the rest. But it was about, that not only do you have to have systems and solutions, and social media these days is a must, but that the last essay I put down there is, it's a shitload of work. Like, anybody that thinks that going into their own business is to produce a passive income, and it is led down the wrong garden path there, because there's I'm yet to find passive income over 23 years. So
it takes a lot of work to produce passive income. I think that's
exactly. In the initial stages, it does. So even if you do buy a property that you can rent out, unless you're inherited that money, you have to work for it. So I think so. Are you doing a lot on Zoom at the moment? Obviously, is that the end game, or is it still to go in face to face and work with people?
I mean, I think Zoom has been a godsend, right? When I lived here before, I think Skype was just about existing. My parents just weren't very good on it. It was always, up their nostrils and goodness knows what. So
that's right.
Yeah, they've grown a lot over the last 2 years. But the so that it was always on the phone, which was really hard. Whereas now, using Zoom, and so on the course, maybe I'll have kind of 6 to 8 people in a class, and I'm dropping them into breakout rooms. Is so useful.
Yes.
Obviously, it cuts down on travel time. There's so much inefficiency, I think, which we've all found, which this kind of change in circumstance has highlighted. Yes. But still, there's a chemical exchange that happens when you're with people, right? Of course, you can connect with people better when we're in this kind of situation, but when we are in the same room, the way you connect is different. So whilst I think, and I hope that business and people are more cognizant of the travel side, particularly from a business point of view, do we need to fly there, just from the climate change, that perspective, I think, is really important. But having said that, though, I think I would love to connect a little bit more with people in person when I can.
Yeah, I think you can't. I think there's also, there's benefits, and I think people being in this situation as well, maybe a little bit more honest than being the face-to-face. So there are some benefits there. Yeah. But, I think that human connection is, what makes us human. So
I think that you're absolutely right, that kind of, they have no choice of when their child comes in, but and it's just kind of poking around or whatever. It's like, I'm a human, and absolutely, I think that it was easier to be, this is work me, and this, then that I'm a different person at home. And I think what certainly has happened over the last couple of years is people are just like, well, I can't do anything about it.
My life. Even I tried to keep, when I kicked off, all my socials separate, and they've all like combined. People are on my personal, on my business, on my podcast. I'm like, I should have just made one page and done it, because that's it. They see you sweaty, they see you on podcasts, they see your life.
Yeah. Which, I think that's certainly that whole person thing, right? And that's another piece about how do we connect. When you see someone as a whole person, it makes it so much easier.
All right. So where can our listeners find you, your coaching, your groups, your handles here?
Yeah, so it is on Instagram. I'm at Brain Powered Coaching, and then my website. There's a few free tools and things if people want to look at that, which is brainpoweredcoaching.com. And Facebook is Brain Powered Coaching too. So nice and easy to remember.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for your time. I know we've run over a little bit, but thank you so much, because this is an amazing and very beneficial to all of our listeners who are thinking of switching their sitch, to how to get out of that imposter syndrome and move forward, and even with the neuroscience behind it, why we do what we do, and that's even more amazing, and even the male female thing, I love that as well. Thank you for sharing your insights. I will keep connected, and I'll see you soon.
Lovely. Thanks, Katie. Take care.
Thank you. You too.
Right. Bye.
Bye.